that the next session is 45 minutes on interdisciplinarity, and I think there's going to be quite a lot of continuity from some of the challenges in the previous session, even though it sounds like a very different topic. My name is Steve Evans. I work in the university in the Department of Engineering. My subject is sustainability, so bringing young people together to tackle some of the challenges of our time tends to lead towards interdisciplinarity in my own research, which is why I've been asked to chair this session with true experts on interdisciplinarity, whatever that means. And I hope we'll explore that in the next few minutes. So I'm going to ask in sequence Alan, Leszek, and Usha to speak for 5 minutes, and then we'll open up to a conversation. Please get your questions in, or get your opinions in, they're allowed. So I'm going to start with introducing Alan Blackwell, who is the Professor of Interdisciplinary Design. I don't know if that's the first where interdisciplinary is in the title, but you can tell us later. So clearly a strong interest. Alan is from Darwin College and recognizes part of the history of the Academy and stretching back to the days of Arnold and the work that Arnold did in trying to bring disciplines together in a variety of interesting ways.
Steve, maybe you want to use the microphone.
Yeah.
Now, can you hear me at the back now?
People online.
Oh, it's for the people online. I'm really sorry. I didn't see any comment.
The green light's on.
The green light is on. Okay, on doesn't. Thank you. Thank you for those of you online. I didn't pick up any text to respond to. I'm sorry about that. We've been generally talking about interdisciplinarity. I've only just started to introduce the first speaker, Alan Blackwell, Professor of Interdisciplinary Design at the University of Cambridge and from Darwin College. He's on the board of the Interdisciplinary Science Reviews and Director in Cambridge of the Crucible Network, which is supporting researchers who are working on the topic of interdisciplinary design. So I can't think of anyone better to give us the first 5 minutes of thoughts about the challenges of interdisciplinarity. The journal was intended to support and encourage interdisciplinarity from its very beginnings. Maybe it's been so successful that all the challenges have been solved.
Thank you very much, Steve. And certainly I'm very happy to be here celebrating in part the legacy of Arnold Bergen, who was master of my college at the time that he was the founding president of the Academy. And I also remember very fondly the support I received from the Academy in 2000 to run a conference called Collaboration and Ownership in the Digital Economy, which was jointly sponsored by the Arts Council of England. A lot of my work is across the two cultures, arts, social science and humanities on one side, and science and technology on the other. So I read the 30th anniversary selection from European Review with great interest. It's not a journal that I follow very closely, but I have been involved for many years in a somewhat similar journal, Interdisciplinary Science Reviews, which was founded in the 1970s. And I had the great privilege to be on the editorial board there together with Marilyn Strathern, who was here earlier today, Gillian Beer, Geoffrey Lloyd, really people who are the pioneers of thinking about what it means to work across disciplines. Especially the editor-in-chief, Willard McCarthy, who was Professor of Digital Humanities at King's College London, and I work closely in the Digital Humanities in Cambridge. Most of what I had to say in answer to the question is really just channeling the wisdom of these people, I have to say, and particularly Willard, who wrote a couple of really insightful editorials. If you're going to stop me in 30 seconds, Steve, I just want to say one thing from Willard in answer to the question. Willard said, intellectual growth is never completed, only continued or abandoned. So have we done interdisciplinarity? No, not if interdisciplinarity means growing. That journal does reflect quite a lot about what it means to be interdisciplinary, and it has a number of quite distinctive insights. One is to note that there is no panoptic view of the disciplines. There isn't a grand center from which all other knowledge could be aggregated or surveyed. In fact, every field of knowledge, like every galaxy, is the center from which you can view all other fields of knowledge. And I think that's a really profound thought that is rarely acknowledged, even in a university that contains many disciplines. The purpose of that journal was very specifically to bring out the relationship between science and technology, which is a matter of great public interest in the 70s and always, and human societies, because the recognition that science and technology needs to, in some ways, be shaped and critiqued from society. But their second and complementary perspective was to think about the cultural significance of science. And in particular, in what ways is science different to arts, music, and literature? But very importantly for that journal, this doesn't mean that anything goes. It's not a journal where you go to publish any old thing that you couldn't publish in a more prestigious place. What we're really looking for when we publish there is firstly, every paper published should be looking for common ground in some sense between the person writing that and the other discipline that they might be visiting in. And also not to smooth over the differences, but actually to make visible what the different assumptions are that are inherent to different disciplines. And I think that's something I've learned very much in my 25-year career of working as a specialist in interdisciplinary practices. Just to, where are we going with interdisciplinary work across Europe? Well, historically, the strategic challenge has been that curiosity has never been allowed free rein in any period of human endeavour. We have power bases from which the wrong kind of curiosity won't be welcome. And because we receive public funds, we're always responsible for saying, what are you being curious for and what good will it do me? And I think that's a very strong ethical commitment. Secondly, I think not historically, but in the modern era, how do we respond to the huge abundance, not just of open access, but of access on all academic publishing, and indeed everything that we come to us from the internet, whether from large language models or just from websites. And the answer is really, as Richard Rorty says, is that we need to go wide. The old model of specialization in which you just went more and more deeply until eventually you achieved insight is not really relevant today. We gain our knowledge from the width of our encounter, and we're still grasping what that means for the academy when you can read more from the internet than you could from even the greatest universities. So I think those are the institutional strategic things. There are some personal challenges, of course. The professional reward for being an interdisciplinary worker is not great. Understanding what interdisciplinarity means is extremely hard to come by, and doing it well is exceedingly difficult. But despite all of those things, as once again, to quote McCarthy, becoming interdisciplinary is intellectually rewarding out of proportion to its costs.
Thank you, thank you. I like the idea that it's rewarding beyond its costs. Can I just do a very quick straw poll? Who would argue that at least part of their own careers has been interdisciplinary in nature? I think that's it. I don't know what that means exactly, but I would suggest to early career researchers, personally, that tackling great challenges requires interdisciplinary collaboration at the very least, and potentially knowledge and competence. And that maybe the eminent people in the room, most of you are wonderfully eminent, and the rest we're not going to mention. Maybe that's part of what the risk that you took at some stage in your career. And I think it might be interesting to talk through those risks. Personally, I find it harder and harder to advise younger academics to take the same risks in the current system. And who better to carry on that conversation? So I'm going to introduce Sir Leszek Borysiewicz, our former Vice-Chancellor, and most importantly, a fellow of this wonderful college, of which I'm a fellow, where we recognize and value his work with early career researchers and supporting them in their development. I'm going to just leave you with that one.
Thanks very much indeed. Well, where do you start? Part three, interdisciplinary in a publishing landscape. Well, let me deal with the second bit first. Do I think the publishing landscape makes a drop of difference? No, I'm not convinced it makes a drop of difference. Good interdisciplinary research will be published in the best journals, and scientists, those in the humanities and the arts, will always aspire to ensure that they're recognized by their peers through the normal media that's there. That said, European Review, was it a worthwhile venture? Yes, it was, and yes, it is. But it's the sort of journal I enjoy picking up and reading, and I'm more likely to read on the train going into London than I am among the journals I must read on a Saturday morning, which would be far more discipline specific. It is a form of output of interdisciplinarity. It is not the raison d'etre of interdisciplinarity. So where have we got to in 30 to 35 years of what Academia Europaea has actually stood for on this particular topic? Is it a reality or an aspiration? It is a reality, but actually it's a journey. And I think we've got a little bit down that journey, and things have improved a lot over the 30 years in relationship to interdisciplinarity, but we haven't hit the end buffers by any means whatsoever. And have we yet achieved what interdisciplinarity could achieve? No, we are getting there, and we're getting more and more examples of how important it is, but it still has a way to go. I'm going to give you three personal reflections. I'm going to say that interdisciplinarity is now more important than ever. And I say that not just from my past experience, but my current experience as chairing Cancer Research UK. Big questions will not be solved by a single unidisciplinary, uni-institutional, uni-departmental model. They will make a contribution to that. But the very big questions really do require now a multitude of inputs. What example can I give you very quickly? COVID. Just think about it. We had engineers who suddenly changed direction to develop CPAP and ventilator systems with very simple devices to start off with. They would never have done it if the pressure hadn't been there, and if all of a sudden pressure had been put on. We had civil engineers and others having to design and build hospitals, as well as needing the social scientists to tell us how are we going to manage the problems that these hospitals, emergency hospitals, would have. That wouldn't have happened without circumstance. And in my own field, vaccine delivery, well, making the vaccines, I have to tell you, is the easiest bit. It's getting people to take them is actually, and believe me, as a clinician, that is something I really need all of my colleagues who understand behavioral sciences in order to try to even forge a good argument as to why you should actually go forward. So for me, it is a given, and it is more necessary than ever before. I think what hasn't changed about interdisciplinarity is it is a team game. And that means there has to be, at its core, an absolute respect of all team members for the expertise that they bring to the table. I mean, I've seen proposals which look fantastic, and you start looking at the team, and you then begin to understand that team is not going to hold it together. There are too many personal egos at play, and they're going to rip the project apart. So for me, the team has to be established, and it has to have a personal chemistry that can take it on, and more importantly, can bring young people into the concept with the idea that they're going to be supported going on downstream. Because the people who take risks with interdisciplinary research are the youngest and earliest career investigators. And then if you're going to have real interdisciplinarity, then you're dealing with one intra, that is intra-institutional. How well does an institution support this? How well do multiple institutions? And the last is international. Believe me, if you think it's difficult institutionally, try it internationally. And that brings me to the last aspect, which is the aspect that a funder has on this. Now, here I speak really for where Cancer Research UK is operating, but also for the program that I'm working with the Max Planck Institutes in Germany for the Diasturic program for the support of use interdisciplinary centres in Central Europe, mostly Slovakia, the Czech Republic and Poland at the present time. How do we need this to happen? The Cancer Grand Challenge model is an interesting model. We spend as a charity around £60 million a year. These are purely interdisciplinary and international programs. They are put together by addressing the 10 biggest questions in cancer. We take those around the world to oncologists in Singapore, in India, in America, in Canada, Europe, all over the world, inviting them to propose what they think are the most important questions that will be cancer in the longer term. We're not looking for 5-year results, we're into 10 years funding scenarios. But we want investigators from all countries and all disciplines. Give you an example of one that we funded, 25 million sterling over 5 years, vaping. Really interesting topic. The statistic, the single fact is, if you are a smoker, vaping is good for you because you get your nicotine in a fix that is free of the tar and the carcinogenic elements that you would normally find in a cigarette. What is not good is the tobacco industry now taking watermelon juice and sticking nicotine in it to create a new breed of addicts. If you were to be doing this in the back streets of London, you would be arrested and actually charged with trying to sell illicit medication. And yet somehow we allow vaping stores up and down the country to be created. Now, what they do is they turn the benefit, the example that I've given you, because that is well established in the literature, they turn that on its head and they're there as a preventative and they're doing social good, whereas in reality they're doing social evil. And the problem is that is not any longer a straight biomedical problem. It is actually a huge social and policy problem that we have to deal with. So the team that is looking at this is mostly constituted by behavioral scientists in the United States, in 2 countries in Europe, alongside scientists who are looking at the nature of addiction that nicotine causes. And anyone who doesn't believe that, believe me, it is more addictive than many of the compounds that you could buy around the corner. The second is topic selection. So I've addressed how Cancer Research UK will set top-down topics. The Max Planck and the Diasturic program requires bottom-up choice of topics. You come with any topic you like, but you need to be able to show how interdisciplinary it is. And again, this is 5 years funding, over €2 million a year, doubled by the country where it is actually based, with an element of forced collaboration with the Max Planck Institute in Germany. It's a very good and innovative model that they're trying to do to promote growth of science in Central Europe. But what is important is that the team has enough individuals to be able to push this forward. Funders have got better at evaluation. That is one element I would say is good. What we got rid of is the double jeopardy. I don't know of any funder who would now consider the engineers to consider the engineering component and the biomedics to consider the medical component. Because what we used to get is the medics would think the engineering component was great, and the engineers would think the medical component was great, but the engineering component was weak. And so now we get everybody in the same room and they see the same peer review, and that goes across the board in these programs. So that's something that has really improved. The double jeopardy is largely gone. Problems are career progression. And I'm afraid I'm going to have a go straight away at the employers. Employers, basically, if you go to a pharmaceutical or industry, or you go to chemistry, basically want a PhD trained chemist. And if you push them hard enough, they'll tell you, we'll produce the interdisciplinarity for them after we've employed them, but we don't want them spending hours and months doing interdisciplinary research. We want them to do more chemistry and to be more unidisciplinary in their domain. And that is why I believe it's the PhD students who take the biggest risk in engaging in interdisciplinary research, and why it behoves on all of us to ensure, and particularly the funders, to ensure that those who come through these programs have an opportunity to develop their skills and the interdisciplinarity downstream. So if you take on interdisciplinary research as a funder, you have to think of the people you're going to have to fund downstream, and to recognize it isn't just going to stop with a finite program, but it's going to be something that goes on. And then the second big problem, if you really want something that will divide everybody in my field, which is, what do we do with the intellectual property? And that I'm not even going to attempt to answer. I'm just going to leave that question hanging. So interdisciplinarity must continue. It must develop until it becomes the norm rather than the exception.
There's quite a lot of substance in that. I've written extensive notes. I'm not going to let you ask any questions. I've got too many interesting ones myself. But I'm going to pass the microphone to Usha. I have to say, I've learned something today that really pleased me. And I think that, Usha, can I encourage you to start your introduction by mentioning your beginning as a teacher and where that took you?
Thank you. So my title in this university is Director of the Centre for Neuroscience in Education. And I started the first centre in the world to try to apply neuroscience insights about the brain to children's education. But as Steve said, that wasn't where I began. So my whole career embodies becoming an interdisciplinary person. I studied psychology at university, and you learn a lot about child development when you study psychology. Then I moved to London and trained as a teacher, and I was in classrooms with children where I could see them struggling to learn to read, and some of the issues they faced really resonated with things I'd learned on my psychology course. And yet, in the teacher training, we weren't covering any of these factors. And so I went back to do a PhD on how children learn to read, and kept applying my kind of psychology behavioural lens to this question. And then I started working across languages, and I thought there's something fundamentally similar about all these children who are struggling to read across languages. They don't seem to be very good at rhythm. And I moved from Cambridge to University College London, where I was in Great Ormond Street Hospital. And so then I was exposed to neuroscience, and I was also exposed to the cochlear implanting, because of course children who are born deaf also struggle to learn to read. And I learned a lot about speech, the actual signal of speech, how the brain processes that signal. And that gave me a lot of ideas about what might be going wrong in the dyslexic brain. But to study those ideas, I needed my own neuroimaging centre, and it was Cambridge who offered me that when they decided to advertise a chair in education that should be research-led. So I came back to Cambridge and we set up a Centre for Neuroscience in Education, and for nearly a decade I was in the education faculty. And so I had students coming from around the world, but this work was very interdisciplinary, and we immediately hit some of these hurdles that have been mentioned by the previous two speakers. So it was okay for me with my chair, But for these students who were starting out, first of all, in the environment they were in, the scientific aspects of their work were not necessarily understood or appreciated. And then secondly, when they wanted to move forward with their career, there was no obvious field for them to be hired in. Now, of course, neuroscience swept the board in education in the sense that there are now many centres and departments across the world, and they want young staff. So the job problem sort of went away on its own. But I have to disagree with Boris, the publishing was not easy. We needed an interdisciplinary journal of our own. And so along with someone at Harvard, I have found the Mind, Brain and Education Society. And we set up our own journal, which was called Mind, Brain and Education. And within a couple of years, we were so flooded with submissions that a second journal was set up, which is called Trends in Neuroscience and Education. And both journals are really flourishing now. It's quite remarkable. Their impact factors are very good. Having that interdisciplinary focus has really helped develop the field and develop the careers of younger researchers. I think the hurdle for the field I'm in now relates to something that both previous speakers mentioned, which is who are you doing it for? Well, you're doing it for schools and children and teachers. And teachers should be involved in the process of creating research questions, deciding how to investigate them, and so on. So I have a colleague in London who runs the London Centre for Education and Neuroscience, and he's recently been trying to get funding from all the major funders for this kind of enterprise, where teachers would be in with you from the get-go. We'd say, you know, these children are struggling with this. How should we address it? And we would have this multidisciplinary approach with expertise from not just the scientists or the psychologists, but from the teachers and even perhaps some of the students themselves. Can we find anybody willing to fund it? So far, it has been a real no-go. Everybody says, what a wonderful idea, but it's not for us. So I think interdisciplinarity is definitely helped by publishing venues, but more is also needed, and the funders are one of the big issues, certainly for the type of work I do.
Wow, thank you. So it's easy, fascinating, important, and difficult, and horrible simultaneously,
Unrewarding.
and enormously rewarding, as you all know, because you put your hands up. Now, put your hands up if you have a question. Over there.
Some of the great discoveries of science being made by trying to isolate a system from the things which might affect it. I think progressively we've learned that there are few, if any, uncoupled systems, simple systems where the direction of causality is known and unique. Under those circumstances, the question then becomes one, it seems to me, becomes one of responsibility. But you're interested in A and B. It just so happens that A and B are part of a much larger, more complex system. Is it legitimate then for you to explore the relationships between A and B without taking the larger system into account? One could think of ways in which such responsibilities have not been carried. One of them, of course, being cigarettes and cancer, but there are many, many others. And of course, very often, for instance, we worked some years ago on which looked at the possibility of relationship between genetically modified organisms and human health. The weight of the industry that did not want particular relationships, even if they existed, to be exposed, came about. So the question is, how do we individually, as disciplinary-based scientists, work in what is inevitable an interdisciplinary context? And where do our responsibilities lie?
I think that's an enormous one, and I'm looking.
I don't answer.
Well, we might go across.
I think there is no immediate answer to your question. However, it comes down for me to the individual integrity of those who are actually proposing these ideas. So the importance here is to have clarity about the information that exists, clarity where there are gaps in that information, so that both sides of an argument can actually accept that there are areas that are genuinely important to explore. There is a problem, which we did experience in the vaping example that I gave. The people who threw out of the room were the policymakers. And it's very interesting because you might think they're going to be the most important. The reason we mostly threw them out of the room was that they already had a preconceived idea of what the answer was going to be. And therefore they were not open to the alternative argument that it could be good or it could be bad. And this is where pressure groups and others do not like that particular position that you take, whichever side of the equation you're on, because they have already decided what the answer is going to be, and all that's required is that false bias of finding the evidence to prove their particular perspective. So it comes down to each and every one of us, interdisciplinary or unidisciplinary, be absolutely clear where the evidence is, honest about where the gaps are, and being prepared to engage in the debate such that it then helps, for example, funders to come in and say, actually, there's a real question to be addressed here. So I'm afraid it doesn't come down to the funders having to make the money, it comes down to the scientists having to make the money, or the researchers and investigators, because this is just as apparent over the 6 wives of Henry VIII, as opposed as much as it is to areas that like GMOs.
Thank you. Anything else? I think that was so important. I'm just going to let it go across.
Yeah, I do agree with Boris. I think the individual researcher must be completely transparent about what we don't know as well as what we do know. Because anything linked to the brain, as soon as you say, well, we showed such and such, and it was in a brain imaging study, your credibility zooms up because everyone thinks, oh, it's been shown in the brain. But of course, it doesn't mean it was right or that that result will replicate and so on. And there are researchers in my area who do make overblown claims. There are also many apps that you can buy for your brain which have absolutely no basis in science, and yet you'll find scientists who will let their name be associated with these apps. Those kind of things are a real unfortunate negative, and yes, I think the onus is on us to always speak up and say what the data do support and what they don't support, and what we don't know is as important as what we do know.
I agree, this is a critical question. I did my PhD in Issues Department in psychology, and that's where I learned about the principle of experimental design. And I'm a professor of design in a computer science department. Every one of my students needs to come to this problem, and I describe what that problem is using terms that I heard in psychology, which is that the design of any scientific investigation involves trade-offs between internal validity and external validity. And a well-designed experiment is not one that has only internal validity or only external, it's always a compromise. For a computer scientist, focusing only on internal validity would be to make a computer system which is elegant, expresses some mathematical proposition in a way that is provable and can't be challenged, but will probably have no relevance to a question in the outside world. On the contrary, you could also say what are the social implications of computers, and you could become an ethnographic social scientist, and you could spend all the time agonizing over technological determinism and socio-technical systems. That focus on external validity gets you in a direction that is not recognizably computer science anymore. So this is the real challenge, I think, for many people, is how do I make the work that I do relevant to the outside world while still recognizably addressing a scientific principle in the department where I happen to be sitting. It's not easy to do, but I think that's the fundamental challenge.
I'm going to add another part of Alan's answer to that, and then come to you. So while the microphone is going there, Alan, at the start, you also said, make visible our assumptions. So not just what we know and don't know, but also what we assume, which is often the thing that's most challenging for other disciplines to learn about us? Your question.
Yeah, thank you. I will try to address the problem of education and the role of interdisciplinarity in education, because one are the good principles. We have challenges that require interdisciplinary research, and many of the researchers we draw in will be schooled or trained in more or less unidisciplinary environment. How do we teach them to cooperate so they can understand each other's way of formulating the challenge and come with partial proposals for addressing it? I had a research center in the 90s on landscape preservation in a humanities perspective. And of course, we had to collaborate with biologists, geographers, geologists, economists, people from law, etc., etc. And it didn't work at all until we set up training programs. How do you actually cooperate? And we had an education scholar in or to train them. But I think that issue has not been addressed yet. How do we teach people to actually using their discipline? And one of the things I think is important is to realize that disciplines are not born alone, but in the cluster of disciplines. So they are born in the context of interdisciplinarity. The second question I would like to hear your proposals on in education is, when can we start in our educational system to teach students to address problems in an interdisciplinary way? I tried that in the early, around 2003-04, when we had a reform of the Danish high school system. There was such a resistance, not from students, but from teachers, that you had to have exams in interdisciplinary collaboration, etc., etc. It was blocked after 6-7 years by a politician who thought it was easier to explain to people that you go to school, you learn Danish, geography, French, physics, and so on and so forth. It still goes on, but how early, that was one of the counter questions we got. Oh, it's too early in high school because they don't have knowledge enough yet really to address it. But it's a way of thinking. It's not only to have the knowledge enough to carry it out on the scientific level. What would be your response to those two educational questions?
Start with him, then. This way. Yeah. I don't.
So you made several very good points. With regard to maturity, there was a time when idealistically I felt that very young students would benefit from learning more interdisciplinary perspective. I've changed my mind. Having tried it, I don't find that my first year university students have the maturity to appreciate the value of interdisciplinary thinking. My view now is that first you have to acquire a discipline and then you become interdisciplinary. Second observation is just education for interdisciplinarity can conform to the error of believing that all knowledge is articulable. Whereas my experience of working across disciplines is that many disciplines have rely on tacit and embodied knowledge that you could be lectured on all you like, but if you don't actually get your hands dirty and spend time doing research that way, you won't acquire it. And so there we've got a limit on the human lifetime. You know, how many different disciplines can you acquire? And I've worked in ethnography, I've worked in the performing and fine arts, and I worked in engineering. That's about all I've got the time for, to be honest.
Yeah, so I think that one of the key things is language, is shared use of language, because as you say, often we're talking at cross purposes with people from other disciplines because we're using the exact same word, but we're using it to mean something very different. So that would be one important insight. The other sort of almost ironical thing is that in primary school, children do learn in an interdisciplinary way, and it used to be much more widespread in England than it is currently, but everything was topic work based. So you might do a topic on dinosaurs or a topic on, I don't know, Kenya, and you do your geography, your maths, it would all be through that theme of the topic, but it's much harder to examine that kind of work. And so as primary schools are also now getting more burdened with testing, it's harder to maintain that approach, but that's what the children love, and teachers love teaching that way.
It would be remiss of me not to add my own piece to this, especially with Damon Dowling in the room. Too much of this interdisciplinary conversation, from my viewpoint as an engineer, talks about the humanities and social sciences and the natural sciences. Engineers bring a really quite different view to doing research, I think, and language. And I would encourage us to bring the other disciplines in. And there was a hint towards art there. There are others. Other disciplines are available. So,
I think one of the problems, having been a professor both in this country and in Australia, about interdisciplinarity is the narrowness of the sixth form education in the UK because of the 3 levels, and very many students tend to do clusters like the Greek, Latin, and ancient history, or physics, chemistry, and biology. It was the welcome relief when I went to Australia, where they had to do 5 subjects for A-level. So I have students, for instance, who have done Latin and classical Chinese, or a mixture of sciences and arts. So you could go interdisciplinary level much earlier. The problem is that the rule books tend to go against them. And then, unfortunately, I was able to break a lot of that when one of our top ancient history students who scored top marks in Greek and in hieroglyphics, but she's also got very good sciences at school leaving, came to me and said, I've told this story many times, but you have the chance to meet this person soon, that she wants to do a dissertation on, believe me, on aborted Egyptian fetuses, mummified. I told her that she has to be good at anatomy, osteology, and physiology to make sense of her material. And fortunately, in Australia, she has the grades to be able to do these in the medical school without doing medicine. And she taught all 3 subjects. And you'll be glad to know that we have just elected her a member of this academy. And you will see a lot of her. And she had been a fellow of Darwin before, so I got a lot of links with this university. But as a professor, I had to pull every string out book or bend every rule to extend her PhD period, because I believe, unfortunately, she got a Commonwealth scholarship, so I was able to extend her PhD period legitimately. And now she's probably a beautiful professor at the age of 38. And that's because she didn't have to go through this system of having just do 3 levels.
So I'm going to use the chair's privilege. We have 1 minute. I'm going to add to that question and then pass to yourself for an answer. Other than encouraging people to go to Scotland for their 6th form, I would wonder whether the person that you're describing has something about themselves which makes them more competent as a team member, as an interdisciplinarian. And when Sir Leszek was speaking, you talked about the ability to find these people, to look at proposals and see whether a team had the possibility to perform. And I wonder if you can give us some quick clues about how to do that in the future, because I'd like to get better.
Yeah, if there was a magic answer, believe me, I wouldn't be sitting here. The point that you make is correct, that the breadth of an education is something that I value. There is something about the liberal arts traditions in the United States which are being heavily discussed. But it's not one size fits all. If you take, for instance, a very good mathematician at the age of 16, they are very unidisciplinary. They are really focused on that one subject. Their whole life is actually embodied in a different type of hieroglyphic, as far as I can see on a board. And you mustn't actually pigeonhole everybody into a particular solution. For instance, if I give a counter argument to the 3A level system, is that we reach specialization much faster. And alongside Alan's suggestion, we therefore get them to the point where they are expert in their discipline much sooner, and therefore they can have the time later on to focus on it in the disciplinarity. So the answer for me is keep it broad. Have things like the International Baccalaureate, have the diversity of education in the higher education system to accommodate both the very specific and the those who wish to take a broader perspective. Now, how do you find these individuals? The way I was certainly examining before this is actually to take them right outside their comfort zone, to see how much interest they've actually got outside of their field. We used to do a little bit of this back in Cardiff when spending my time there, which was, for example, in medicine, you used to have to always have a conversation piece with the prospective medical student. And inevitably, it was about the political situation in Bosnia. What would you be the most important thing you do in a refugee camp? And I recall one young student who's then age 17 from Cumbrana. And I looked at him and asked about Bosnia, and he kind of looked at me and I think, oh God, you don't even know where Bosnia is, do you? And you have to try and find in that individual what makes them light up. And I finally said, okay, let's put aside everything that you've written, because that's been written by you and your teacher. Tell me what you want to do on a Saturday afternoon. What transpired is that he knew more about the internal combustion engine of a Triumph motorcycle. And once you could get him on that topic, you could broaden out their solution. So stop trying to think that there are topics which will define them, and actually find them in the individual student. And in the same way, when we form teams, look for teams that will have mutual respect for novel lines of investigation. A historian's research and a historian's research approach will be very different from, for instance, the medics. Is that true? Historians deal with facts, but some of those facts have got gaps in them, and some of those gaps may never be filled. And yet they still have to speculate to reach an end position. You may not like it. What do you think most medics do around the bedside? They have a few facts, they have a few things they can do, and then they spend the rest of the time in their head speculating about which of those is going to be least harm, probably. So the similarities are what we should be looking for. And engineers, dare I say it, are great at finding those similarities. So use them and use what we've learned about education. Usha's work teaches us one thing, that we are actually tied from day one by the way in which our brain is wired and put together. And what we've got to do is to create the opportunities for young people to be as broad as they can be early on, not obsess about whether we can grade it and test it to the nth degree, and to keep the opportunities open for as many students as we can to achieve the best that they can themselves. And guess what? If you've got interested minds, interdisciplinarity will follow.
Great.
I think that's an excellent thing. So we need to move on. Can I ask you to thank the panel?